The Beast. A man named Brian lived alone in a cabin in the woods with his dog Sally. Brian had been raised on a ranch his whole life and understood how to live on his own without the help of civilization. In fact, he preferred to live so far from the rest of the world. Brian had lived in this cabin for over 2 decades. Over that time, he had learned how to predict the weather, know when seasons were changing, and even saw the patterns of the local wildlife. However, Brian noticed that the local animals were acting strangely. Local deer and elk hadn't been coming around, and he also started seeing more carcasses around the area. Brian also started to feel like he was being watched. Finding this strange, he figured a new apex animal had entered the area. Brian then began to prepare to go out and hunt this new animal since it was taking away his natural food source. After a couple of days of preparation, he began his hunt. It's early morning, and the sun is barely rising over the mountains. Bringing Sally, they trot off into the woods. Not long into the hunt, they found another corpse. Brian scanned the area, searching for any trace of the creature Sally could use to track its scent. Bingo! A clump of hair was tangled in the deer's antlers. Brian grabbed the hair and put it against Sally's nose. She sniffed it for some time, looked behind her, and made her way north. Brian followed. After several hours, Sally led Brian to a stream, stopped, and pointed. Brian looked ahead and saw a cave opening on the hill before him. With his rifle drawn and Sally at his hip, Brian approached the cave's mouth cautiously. He peered inside. It wasn't very deep. He could see the back wall. A putrid stench of rot and decay clung to the air, thick and suffocating. He quickly noticed a large amount of decomposing animal corpses scattered around the cave. He gagged. He exited the cave and inhaled a deep breath of fresh, clean air. He then turned to Sally to whistle, but Sally was staring intensely at the tree line. Brian looked where Sally was looking and couldn't see anything. "What is it, girl?" he says. Sally's fur begins to rise on her back. Her tail wraps between her legs and she hunches and growls aggressively. Snap! A branch is heard breaking. The forest falls unnaturally silent. Brian looks back to the trees and sees a large creature emerging from the bush. The towering creature stood 9 feet tall, its massive frame easily exceeding 1,000 pounds. It had long, large arms. It was covered in grayish, silver fur, except for its face. Its face was black. All you could make out were yellow eyes. Sally erupts in an aggressive bark, and Brian aims his rifle at the creature. The creature lets out an earth-shattering roar and charges. Brian, without hesitation, fires a shot. The beast gets grazed by the bullet but isn't fazed and continues at Brian. Brian's hands trembled as he fumbled to chamber another round, his breath hitching. There's no time. The creature is within 10 feet of Brian and closing fast. Brian freezes in horror, knowing he is about to meet his demise when Sally gets in between them and bites the creature on its calf. The beast lets out a cry. It then reaches down, grabs Sally, and throws her. Sally yipes as she hits the ground and rolls lifeless. Brian now lets out a cry. No! Then cocks the rifle and points it at the creature. But the creature grabs the rifle just before Brian can get a shot off. The creature then throws the rifle and grabs Brian by the throat. It lifts Brian quickly and brings him eye to eye. Brian now sees the creature up close and sees the creature's face is covered in what looks like battle scars. It had a large mouth and no nose, just 2 holes where a nose would be, and its eyes were even more prominent and now seemed to have a gold color to them. The creature sniffed heavily. Then its upper lip quivered and its brow furrowed. It began to squeeze Brian's throat. Brian gasped and tried to fight the creature's colossal hand, but it was useless. It was far too strong. Brian's eyes began to roll, his vision blurring and hearing fading. It seemed his life was over. Then all at once, Brian's vision returns. He starts to regain consciousness and finds himself on the ground. Confused, he looks up and sees the creature stumbling in pain. His hearing returns as the creature is mid-roar. Then he sees it, Sally biting at the creature's back thigh. Brian quickly stands up, grabs his revolver from his back, and fires 5 shots at the creature's head. The creature stops screaming, its massive chest heaving. It stumbles back, dragging itself a few feet before its knees buckle. Then with a heavy, final breath, it collapses. Brian approaches the creature and pokes it with his foot. It's lifeless. Brian lets out a sigh of relief and goes over to Sally. Brian knelt beside Sally, pulling her close, whispering his thanks between shaky breaths. He ran his hands over her fur, pressing his forehead against hers. Brian then grabs his rifle and looks at the sky. Night is coming. He looks at Sally. Let's go, girl. We'll come back tomorrow and deal with that thing. They then make their way back to the cabin. Once back at the cabin, Brian sits in his rocking chair on the porch with Sally beside him as they overlook the moonlit valley beneath him. He leans back and looks up to the stars, grateful to be alive and knowing he can return to his way of living. Brian looks down at Sally, who's in a deep sleep and snoring loud. Brian smiles and looks back at the valley beneath him. But his peace is quickly broken when a low but thunderous roar echoes throughout the valley. It's nothing like he's ever heard. Sally's head raises in concern. It can't be. Is it still alive? Brian wonders. And just like that, another roar can be heard from the other side of the valley, and then another one and another one. Brian counts 4 different roars communicating with one another. Then, in a very unsettling way, they all became silent. Brian's breath hitched as he rose from his chair, his fingers curled into fists, knuckles white. He stared into the valley, heart hammering. He looks down at Sally, who is looking up at him, then back to the valley. Brian knows this is only the beginning of an even bigger nightmare. Did you like this story? If you did, please be sure to like, comment, share, and follow for more.